So let's talk about the beautiful millennial kingdom, because there's a lot in there on how beautiful it's going to be. So I'm going to kind of leave this to you right now and just give us an outline of what it's going to look like and all that good stuff.
Let's, since you have your software, I mean, if you can, I mean, I can read it on my phone, but Isaiah.
I still haven't sharing my screen, so just tell me where to go.
Yeah, go to Isaiah chapter 2, verses.
Okay, you got to give me a minute though.
Sure.
I'm not.
What we're going to see in these passages is, again, these promises that God made of what would come to be. And so for us, we look at it and we go, hey, God has to fulfill his promises or he's a liar. And we know Titus 1 verse 2, God's not a liar. So in these passages, you get these glimpses of this kingdom that's going to be so extensive it's going to be very organized. We have I shared with you a picture of that, of the organization. But here, these passages are great. So
where I'm in Isaiah, you did say chapter 2, yeah?
Yeah, just read verses 2 through 4.
Hold on. You're going to make me read. You're going to make me put on my glasses.
Yeah.
That's fine. Okay, now it will come about. Wait, did I read that right? Now it will come about that in the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains and will be raised above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. You said through verse 4, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. And many peoples will come and say, come, let us come up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. Oh, I think I went too far. No, I did not. That he may teach us concerning his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For the Lord will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he will judge between the nations and will render decisions for many peoples. And they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war.
I mean, this is beautiful in the sense of you have so many riches here. In the sense of it talks about the mountain being lifted up, being Israel, the promises that God made to Israel, which they have never fulfilled, especially in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 15, other passages that speak about Israel being the head, not the tail of all nations. And here, what does it say? It says and the nations will stream into it. So Israel is going to be the central point. There are going to be nations. There are going to be ethnic groups. There are going to be countries during the millennium. And they're each going to, as we saw in Zechariah 14, they're going to have to send representatives to come and make an appearance in Jerusalem. But here, God's majesty is going to be displayed. Not everybody's going to be living in Jerusalem. I mean, again, the goal.
Wait, can you follow? Just help me with that. What do you mean not everyone's going to live in? So help me understand that. Because
there's no way it's possible for all of the nations to be dwelling within a 50 square mile. That doesn't bring, I don't think that's certainly as here, if you have the nations are going to flow into it, that means they're going to be out somewhere else.
So within that same region?
No, worldwide.
So you're talking like in the America, Canada?
Now, does God bring all the continents back together again? We don't have any, kind of the opposite of the
right. Yeah. So that typology might change. Topography.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we have topography changes already. We know that. And so here again, that we have Israel being the chief, or Jerusalem being the chief of all mountains. There's going to be other mountains. It says that, but where are those at in comparison? And so how it works, we don't know. But the nations will be living, they will be building, they'll be planting. And as it says here, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house, that he may teach us his ways. And so we walk in his path. So you have scripture, you have teaching going on from the land. You have priests that are operating again, as we saw in that chart or in that map. Ezekiel 40 through 48, they're going to be having sacrifices again. That makes people freak out. But we can talk about that. So here in Isaiah, it's no war. You have central worship. He's going to be judging. This verse, Isaiah 2:4, is a verse that they have at the United Nations when it was founded, 70 years ago. Is this? They will turn their swords into plowshares. It started out well. It's a great idea. Yeah. That was their original
Okay,
verse.
you just literally blew my mind. The United Satanic Gathering people have that?
They've had it forever. And then if you go to some of their original monuments as they started, this is what they had. Again, that was the idea. Now, certainly they weren't doing it God's way, even back then. But the idea was here of war being removed, which is great. It's going to be technological. It's going to be agricultural. It's going to be family oriented. But let's go to Isaiah 11, verses 6 through 9. And this is where the animals come to play.
Yes.
Which is great.
The wolf.
Yes, the wolf.
So you said 6 through 9?
Yeah.
Do you want to read that or do you want me to read it?
Oh, go ahead. You're doing great.
Okay, great. Right. I'll sound like a New Yorker for Sir Pierce the Veil. How about that? He said, read the Bible like a New Yorker. No, I'm teasing. And the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat, and the calf, and the young lion, and the fatling. What the heck is a fatling?
A calf.
Okay, thank you. Together, and a little boy will lead them. I've always loved that verse, except for the fatling, because, whatever. But yeah, that's just so sweet. Where am I going to?
Verse through 9.
9. Also, the cow and the bear will graze. Their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The nursing child will play by the hole of the cobra. Oh, see, I don't like that part because that means there's still going to be snakes. And the weaned child will put his hand on the viper's den. They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord, and as the waters cover the sea. It's so beautiful. It
really is. It's so beautiful and rich. And again, if you were to ask, I'm not picking on anybody. That's not my heart. It's just to say, if you ask a millennial person or a post-millennial, you say, hey, how is this prophecy? This is a prophecy. How is it fulfilled? Spiritual.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, what does that even mean? And so what you have is, again, I believe straightforward. There's nothing in this text that would tell me that any of this is spiritual. This is straightforward. And it's not going to happen during the church age. Again, we're not going to have this. I mean, even the church has never seen this. So that Jesus comes back post-millennial or after the 1,000 years. This is a prophecy of the 1,000-year reign, where now we've already seen geographical changes. We've seen ethnic group changes, national changes, nations. We've seen the nature of worship. Here now you have environmental or in the animal world. Think about I see this often, that take a lion that was created by God in the Garden of Eden, way back in the beginning. Did they have sharp teeth? Of course they did.
Yeah.
But they were vegetarians. It's very clear that Genesis 1:28 and 29, it says clear that I will give you the green food just like I've given the animals. So in the same way, during the millennium, the lion with its long teeth is still going to be eating straw. So there's, just because we see the teeth doesn't mean that they were created intentionally for that. Because if you look at a koala uses its strong teeth to bust up the bamboo. It doesn't, as far as I know, it doesn't eat meat in the same way, but it can still do a lot of vegetarian stuff. So we have healing between not only the animals themselves, but us and the animals.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a child's not going to be scared of a goat or a calf or the cow or the bear. I mean, this is just awesome. This is tremendous. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. And the other thing too is, today, when we think about the existence of God, is so suppressed. Romans 1:20 is just suppressed. 19 and 20. Back then, the whole earth is going to be full of the knowledge of God. There's no atheists. We also know in Isaiah 65, which that's another long passage, but God says, I will answer them before they even ask. So God is going to be right there when a prayer goes up. His proximity to his people. We're not going to be walking by faith. We're going to be walking by sight. Man, glorious.
Absolutely. I know. So can I digress real quick? Mo had a question. I really wasn't going to go. Oh, you started. never mind, Sandra. We'll get it to the end then, because that's kind of off topic, but I'll answer it because it's Mo. So does that mean like us? So, because I love animals, I do, even though I'd kill them if I was hungry on a desert island somewhere. But we all would. Let's be real. Would you not kill something if you were stranded on an island? I think we're all just going to kill Bambi if we had to. But I do. I love animals. I love them. And I remember when I lived in Georgia, I used to mountain bike up there and then, walk the little trail. So there was one day I was walking with my 2 dogs. And Haley, I could keep off of a leash because she would listen. Sheba's, no, that's not happening because they'll just run. So Haley is off the leash. She's doing her thing, whatever. And, Oolong's next to me. And so we're getting kind of to the close. I used to walk Mount Tabor over there in Hiram. And anyway, so all of a sudden I see these people coming down the mountain like in a panic. So I'm certainly not that person, Mondo. Like if someone has panic, I'm not going to find out what's happening. I'm leaving, and I'll probably leave you behind while I'm at it. So I'm just following them. Like I had no idea. I just knew there was panic on their face. So all of a sudden, the one girl, she's like, and then I call Haley because now I don't know what's happening. So Haley comes and I, immediately put her on the leash. And all of a sudden I hear the woman say, "There's a bear." And I'm like, oh, sweetness, we're going to die. Today's the day I'm going to die. So then at that moment, I snatched up both of my dogs and I just took off to my car and I just followed the people, whatever. I come home. My roommate, David's like, "Why did you panic?" And I'm like, "It's a bear." He's like, "They don't hurt you though." And I know there's 2, there's a brown and a black. So whatever the good one was, I believe it was the brown bear, right? Isn't it brown bear? I don't know. Whichever the nicer one is, that would probably run from us. And I'm like, oh, man. But anyway, I never went back to that mountain after that day. But my point is, during this time, I'm not going to run from a bear, which is weird. Can you imagine just walking up to a lion just randomly and like touching his mane or just, I don't know. That's just so weird because that is a massive animal.
Yeah.
I mean, so beautiful. Okay, where do you want me to go to next?
Let's go to Isaiah 65 because this is a little bit of a longer passage, but it does. It's also helpful to see the consistency in this. This is going to bring up some other questions about death in the millennium.
Okay, can you still see that? I kind of made this a little bigger from my old lady eyes, so you can still see that on the screen.
Yeah, I can see it. Go to if you can go to verse 17. There we go. And maybe we go a few verses at a time here because it's pretty long.
Okay. So start reading.
Yeah.
"For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things will not be remembered or come to mind." Just tell me when to stop. "But be glad and rejoice forever in what I create. For behold, I create." I'm emphasizing that because some people just don't believe God has control over anything. Okay, "But be glad and rejoice forever in what I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem for rejoicing and her people for gladness. I will also rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people. And there will no longer be heard in her the voice of weeping and the sound of crying." So
here, just at least the first 3 verses, you have the supremacy, the leadership of Israel, which again goes back. Why? I mean, we say this, well, who cares about Israel? Why should we even care about Israel? Well, the only reason we care about Israel is we care about Israel the same reason that God does, is because he made promise to Abraham.
Yeah.
And so it's not that, even today, I'll just like today in supporting for people often support the modern state of Israel. Well, why are we supporters of Israel? Is it because that they're a righteous nation, that they do everything right? No, crying out loud, they're sinners like everybody else. Their government is imperfect. They make a lot of mistakes. When people say, "Why do you support Israel?" I'd say, well, my answer is, why does God support Israel? Because he made promises. Amen. God loves Israel. He made promises to them, and he knows that they're wicked. He knows that they've rejected his son. He knows that they're not in a state of salvation, but he made promises. And so that's ultimately, again, what it comes down to here is during the millennial period, those promises that God made, like in here in Isaiah 65, that I'm going to create Jerusalem to be a joy, and in her people will be in gladness. You see a distinction that during the millennium, like Fruchtenbaum in his book, he talks about this, that we're going to talk about death in the next few verses. that there will be no death in Jerusalem, that all of Israel will be saved, and there'll be every last person, every last Jewish person born will come to salvation during the millennial period. That's not true of the rest of the world at the time. But it is true of the focus that God is going to keep his promises to Israel in this way. But so in verse 20, I'll read it. It just says, no more shall there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not fill out his days. For the young man shall die 100 years old, and the sinner 100 years old shall be accursed. So what's interesting here, this is a very interesting phrase. Even if you look at this, the commentaries, they're like, man, the Hebrew is just weird here. But the idea is that if you're a believer, because, let me step back for a minute. Okay, we're going to be there in our glorified bodies. That we're not having children, we're not married, we're ruling and reigning, and we'll talk about that, the leadership, the organization in a minute. But at the sheep and goat judgment, that's right in that 75 days, Jesus is talking to the nations. He's seeing Israel has been rescued. So he says, okay, he has a group of Israel. He has a group of the Gentiles. The righteous that are saved, that are remaining, they all go into the kingdom, all of them. But the Gentiles, there are the saved and unsaved. They're the tribulation saints that survive all the way to the end. And then he says, okay, tribulation saints, you're in your natural bodies like we are right now at this very moment. They're saved. They're in their natural bodies. He says, enter into the kingdom. All the rest of the unbelievers dead. So at the beginning, at that inauguration ceremony, that feast, the only people that exist on earth, all of the resurrected people, the church, Abraham, Isaac, all of us been resurrected into our new bodies, glorified bodies. But those that were living at the time, they go in their natural bodies. And so we start the millennium with only believers. Now, we're never going to become an unbeliever because we're already glorified. We'll never be able to sin again.
Right.
But for them, as they marry and do other things and have their families and have children, the children are born as sinners, just like we are today. So as they grow up, they need to hear the gospel. That's why we saw in those other passages that the Bible's going to be taught. Salvation's going to be taught from Jerusalem and other parts. That's going to be part of our job as well, ruling and reigning. So these children that are born, which there's going to be millions upon millions, I imagine, they need to hear the gospel and they need to believe. And if you come to faith, you will live the whole entire 1,000 years until the end. But if you refuse, according to what some scholars will say with this passage, it's a little bit kind of strangely written, is that the only people who die, and they'll have until 100 years old to make a decision, are people, it says those who die will be considered cursed. So for those that come to 100 and say, you know what, I don't want Jesus, why? I can't even imagine it. Then they,
I know that baffles me, being that he's sitting right there on the throne. Just shows the wickedness of man's heart.
Yep. It shows the, I think the other thing too, this is a theological concept, which I think is valuable, is God is saying, humanity and the angels, I want you to see the pervasiveness of sin. That even though Satan's not here, there's no demons, there's no external temptation, the sinful nature, which is just in the flesh, again, we don't have that because we're going to be glorified. Sin is so pervasive. The sinfulness of sin is still there, that it still will corrupt even without Satan being there.
Yeah.
So he allows it to work its way out and to show that he has to, we're going to have this 1,000-year experiment. And then when we get to the end, he's going to say, do you see what I got to do? I got to remove sin from everything. That's why you have the new heavens and the new earth at the end where righteousness dwells, according to 2 Peter chapter 3. So going back here, you have people dying during the tribulation who are unbelievers. But everybody else, man, they're going to live long. So verse 21, they shall build houses and inhabit. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit, like what would happen in wartime. They shall not plant and another eat, for like the days of a tree shall the days of my people be, and my chosen shall long enjoy, or my elect, the work of their hands. They shall not labor in vain or bear children for calamity, for they shall be the offspring of the blessed of the Lord. And
go ahead, finish.
Yep.
All right. So when it says bear children for calamity, what does that mean?
It bear children that will end up dying or for the sake of being taken from their parents or evil or wickedness, any sort of war or calamity. Because again, Zechariah 14 or other parts of Israel's history, children were born and then they were immediately killed by a warring army or something.
Gotcha. Okay.
He says,
I've always wondered what that meant. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
No, so here's the last two verses. He says, before they call, I will answer. While they are yet speaking, I will hear. Man, that's awesome to get immediate prayer response. The wolf and the lamb shall graze together. The lion shall eat straw like the ox. The dust shall be the serpent's food. And then again, they shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. This is what we have to look forward to. Because let me say this, that for those of you people who have ever been sought to be evangelized by a Jehovah's Witness, knock on the door. There's one thing that the Jehovah's Witnesses, at least in this part, get right. We often talk about going to heaven, going to heaven, going to heaven. And that is true. But heaven is not our permanent home, right? We're there for 7 years, but the meek will inherit what? The earth.
I was going to say that, but I thought maybe I shouldn't because what if I'm wrong? Okay, go ahead.
What the Jehovah's Witnesses focus on is like, you Christians, all you talk about is heaven. Where the Bible says that the kingdom is part of the earth, and they're talking about the millennial kingdom. And so I think they're correct, but yet they're wrong in so many other ways. But for us, we go to heaven, but that's not the end place. The end place is for us to come back down here on earth, where Jesus is going to rule and reign. Again, and all of the mountain, we're going to be part of that. So earth is going to be the focus. The kingdom is going to be the focus. And we get to be a part of that, which is going to be awesome because, again, we have some responsibilities to do, which we can talk about. But there's one more verse that, well, it says pretty much the same thing. It's Micah chapter 4, 1-5, but it says the same thing as Isaiah. But again, it's another prophet that's telling and making a prophecy that has to be fulfilled or else God is a liar. And it has to be fulfilled literally.
I'm there. I don't know if you want to.
Let's do it. I mean, just read the whole thing if you don't mind, because this will be consistent.
Okay, so I can read it here, but then I have it here because that's how I have to scroll. So, and it will come about in the last days that the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of mountains and will be raised above the hills. And the peoples will stream to it. Many nations will come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord and to the house of God of Jacob, that he may teach us about his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For from Zion will go forth the law. So let me pause there. So what law? Do you know?
We do know that the word law is just the word Torah. I think that if you ask a Jewish person today, they would say that it's the original Mosaic law. I don't think so. Because even now, is the Christian under the law? It's a trick question. We would say, well, what do you mean? We're 1 Corinthians 9, Paul says, I'm not under the law,
right?
But I'm under the law of Christ. So we're not under the law of Moses. We're under the law of Messiah, Galatians 6:2, 1 Corinthians 9. So there will be law. I think the law that we're under now, which is the law of the Spirit of life, according to 2 Corinthians 3, is the law that he's talking about there, which is referenced in Jeremiah 31 under the new covenant.
Gotcha. Okay, makes sense. Even the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Can continue to read?
Yeah.
Okay. And he will judge between many peoples and render decisions for mighty distant nations. Then they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they train for war. Each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree, with no one to make them afraid. For the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. Though all the peoples walk, hold on, let me roll that up. There we go. Though all the peoples walk, each in the name of his God. So I
have a question about that too.
Yeah. What does that mean?
Well,
because we're technically reading about the millennial.
Here it's certainly from a Jewish context. Some people might wonder whether it's in reference to something in the present tense, because remember, these prophets jump back and forth. So it's like, yeah, even though we have all this godliness, wherever, we're going to walk faithful. It's hard for me to believe that that's in reference to the millennium, So it could be one of these kind of parenthetical passages that you see, again, going back and forth to the current day, which is what they were doing. But right in the middle of these millennial promises, you go, look around, look at all this. But no, we're going to stay faithful because we want that. I mean, that's just one option.
Yeah, that's the only confusing part sometimes with like Isaiah as well. Like you really have to know because that kind of jumps around.
It does.
That's why, not that I don't read the Old Testament, of course I do, but it can be confusing. And, so that's why I'm glad I have the software so I can kind of do a deep dive. But you're the Logos Bible software tonight, Mondo. Okay, so thank you.
I have Logos software myself. It's very, very valuable.
Well, I have the cheap version, whatever I paid for. I don't know. I don't get much with it, but that's okay. And then I get my free books every month. And I'm like, okay. I just buy them. Half of them I don't even know. Unless it's like really something that I'm not going to buy. Because they do have different religions on here, as you know.
Yeah.
So I have to be mindful of that. Like the title sounds good. And I'm like, that doesn't really sound biblical, though.
I mean, they're an evangelical organization. That's true. But they do market to the broadest Christian.
They do. They do.
Yeah.
But it's a good software. I really enjoy it. All the people's, I'm just going to read that again from verse 5.
You can, okay, whatever.
Yeah. So what do you want me to go down to 6 then?
No, actually, if you can, go to Matthew 19, verses 20 and verse 28, because this is where we can transition, because all the rest of the verses you see, there's a lot. Wow, in the Old Testament. And in Fruchtenbaum's book, he goes through all of them. I mean, he's very thorough to say, for those of you that want to deny a millennium, what are we going to do with these 150 verses that haven't been fulfilled yet in a way that's normal? And so what's the good thing in Matthew 19, verse 28?
Oh, 28.
Yeah. This is where 28. There we go. This is Peter or Jesus talking to Peter. And this is where we start to get a glimpse at what are we going to be doing during the millennium?
So go ahead, start reading.
Yeah.
How far do you want me to read?
Just verse 20. Oh, you can do 28 and 29. That's fine.
Okay. And Jesus said to them, truly I say to you that you who have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man will sit on his glory. Did I read that word right? Yeah. When the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne, you also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone who has left houses, or brothers or sisters, or father or mother, or children, or farms, for my name's sake will receive many times as much and will inherit eternal life.
So it's what I love about this passage is that Peter is talking about the rich. Or, I mean, Matthew's writing about the rich. And so he's talking about the rich young ruler and the problems he had. Remember, come follow me. And he wouldn't because he was rich. Mm-hmm. And then Peter, in his natural way, well, what about us? What are we going to get? We left everything to follow you. What are we going to get? And then
we love Peter.
Yeah. Jesus didn't rebuke him.
Yeah.
He said, I say to you, in the regeneration, you're going to sit at my right hand, man. You and the other apostles sitting on 12 thrones. So what it tells us is that there's a leadership, there's an organizational structure of government. This might be helpful to bring up that other picture. Because
I think Sandra's doing it.
Okay,
I don't know.
Perfect. Yeah, this would be helpful because for us, we know in Revelation 2 and 3, in 2 Timothy, there's several passages that speak about this, that we are going to rule and reign with Jesus. So in this image, let's see. I'm sorry that.
She'll get up. Do you want me to grab it, Sandra? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
And then it's this one here. Yeah.
Yep. So this is chapter 18 of Fruchtenbaum's book, The Government of the Messianic Kingdom. It's just well done. You have the Gentile branch and then you have the Jewish branch. And then of the Gentiles, there's the church and the tribulation saints. That's Revelation 20, 4-6. Mm-hmm. That they're going to be resurrected and we're going to rule and reign with him. Then underneath that, you're going to have kings. There's going to be kings of the different nations still. And then you're going to have the Gentile nations. So that's on the Gentile side. Mm. And then on the Jewish side, you have David. David's going to be resurrected. So Jesus obviously is the King of Kings. Mm-hmm. He's the main leader. But under him, he's going to have the Gentile branch, the church. And then over here in Israel, he's going to have David. He's going to have the 12 apostles. He's going to have other princes, judges, and counselors, Israel. And then the Gentiles, nations are going to come under Israel as one of the nations. And so one of the favorite passages is 1 Corinthians 6:3, which says, Paul is criticizing the Corinthian churches. Don't you know that you're going to adjudicate, you're going to judge the world? Come on, guys. If you can't get these little things figured out, don't you know your destiny? You can't judge things between yourselves right now by the Holy Spirit? Man, what's wrong with you? Live up to your calling. So we have a wonderful, wonderful destiny that we're going to have during the millennial period in our glorified bodies. Marzulli, L.A. Marzulli likes to call us the Lord's white horse police force because of the white horses in Revelation 19. And so we're going to be in charge of governing, and which to me, Romans 8:17 and 18 is another great passage which speaks about that if we suffer with him, that we will be glorified with him, that we will be joint heirs with Christ. That what does Jesus inherit? Well, according to Psalm 2 and Revelation 2 and 3, he inherits the nations. And he says, you're going to sit on my throne and you're going to inherit the nations too. Why? Well, why would I get to do that? Because you're part of the church. You're my bride. You're here with me. You're joint heirs with me. So what Jesus inherits, we get to inherit naturally because of his worthiness. But man, we're going to be busy. One of my favorite parables is in Luke 19, where Jesus is talking about the parable of the talent, et cetera, et cetera. And he says, well, because you've been faithful with the 5 and you've made it to 10, go be ruler over 10 cities. Go be ruler over 5 cities. Go be ruler over this neighborhood. So the faithfulness that we show in this life, this Christian life, when we get our rewards, not only do we get crowns, but we're going to have responsibilities. So he might say, hey, Mondo, I want you to be ruler over this neighborhood in that part of the world. And now you're in charge there. I want you to get back to me if there's any issues. And if there are, let me know, but take care of business. Okay. Yes, sir. Teach them about me. Teach them the gospel. There's going to be people being born there. Make sure that the gospel is being presented. Yes, sir, Lord. Absolutely.
Can I ask you some questions here on this? Because this chart kind of blew my mind. So I was always under the impression that, so this is how I have always been taught, and which sometimes I try to get out of that way of thinking, right? What did I grow up with hearing in church without diving into the Bible myself? So on the Jewish side, you have David and the 12 apostles. I was always under the assumption that, so we're raptured, the people before or after Christ ascended. This is how I always pictured it. So the dead in Christ are the ones who, from the time, Ascension, Day of Pentecost, whenever the church began, that was those who are resurrecting with us, or they're first, and then we meet them in the air. Then I was always under the impression that after the millennial kingdom, at the, I think it's after or before the great white throne judgment, is when the Davids and the 12 apostles, that they will be resurrected. So help me understand that.
Okay. That can't be the case. And the reason why is because the promises that which we were discussing were made to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all the Jews and the others. So they have to be resurrected prior to the millennium in order to experience the fulfillment of those promises. Right?
Yeah.
Because if they're resurrected after, well, then they don't get to they're not living on earth. They're stuck in heaven, which isn't a bad place. But the fact of the matter is, no, they have to be resurrected prior to the beginning of the millennium. Now, let's look at some chronology, because this dispensationalists, they have a very unique understanding of this. So what they'll say is, okay, at the rapture, it says the dead in Christ, what you just described. At the rapture, which is before the tribulation, the ones that are resurrected is only the church. It's only those that are from the apostles or the Acts chapter 2 on until the time of the rapture. Well, then we go to heaven in our glorified bodies. That's the gift that we get as the bride of Christ. So we go up there and we go, hey, there's Abraham, but he doesn't have a body yet. Hey, there's Adam. He doesn't have a body yet, but we do. But then when Jesus comes back at the second coming, remember, people are dying. People are dying during the tribulation, Revelation 7. They're coming up into heaven. These are the ones that have died and come out of the great tribulation. So their spirits are in heaven now. Revelation 6:9, those under the souls under the altar. So they're up there. They're in heaven, but their spirits are there, but Abraham's spirit's there. So at their second coming, even though it doesn't say it specifically, that after Jesus cleans things up, it says in Revelation 20, verses 4-6, and the rest of the dead were resurrected. That would be the tribulation saints. That would be Adam. That would be Abraham, David, all these other guys now are resurrected, given new bodies, glorified bodies, in order to experience the millennial kingdom. So that's prior to the 1,000 years in Revelation 20, verses 4-6. And that finalizes the category of the first resurrection. Blessed are all those who are part of the first resurrection. We see that again in chapter 20, verses 4-6. So the first resurrection is the blessed resurrection. There's another resurrection that's happening at the end of the millennium, but that's a resurrection unto condemnation. You don't want to be a part of the second one. That's bad.
Makes sense. Okay, now, that makes sense totally, because that was always confusing to me. So
it can be very confusing. Especially when I'll give you another couple passages that we don't need to read. I have Ezekiel 34 verses 23 and 24, Ezekiel 37, 24 and 25, Jeremiah 30 verse 9, and Hosea 3:5 all speak about David being raised from the dead. And people, if you ask an all-millennialist, they'll say, well, that's in reference to Jesus. And you said, well, he is the son of David. And sometimes you do see that. I don't want to deny that. But I think if you just read it straightforward, it's David. It's King David again. Yeah. And so those passages are again, there's no reason to spiritualize them unless the text tells us to. And there's nothing in the text or even logic that would require that. So
you said, I wrote everything else down, but Ezekiel 34, what were those verses?
Verses 23 and 24.
Okay. And then Ezekiel 37, 24, 25, Jeremiah 30, 30 verse 9, Hosea 3:5, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. I mean, I'm writing fast, and again, I do support lawyers, so they go at a mile a minute, but I was like, oh, sweetness, I forgot I couldn't get that too fast. Okay, another question on this chart. So on one side, you have the Gentile branch. I never knew that. I had no idea. I thought it was, I thought both parties were just intermingled, so to speak.
You know, that's a good point because, see, this is often the case. And this is often the case with those who subscribe to amillennial or even postmillennial or even what we come to know today as covenant theology. A lot of people in the Reformed camp, which again is very broad, but they're non-dispensational. And so for them, there's only one people of God. So they do not see a difference, a distinction between Israel and the church. And that's a very dispensational distinction. But we look at in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 32, it says, give no offense to the Jew or the Gentile or the church of God. You're like, hey, now we have a third category? Yes, because this is the newness of what you have of the church. The church, according to Ephesians chapter 2, 11 through 17, is made up of Jews and Gentiles who are put into this new body, this new group, totally separate group. They're not Jews or Gentiles, even though they came out of those groups. This is this new group of the church. So what you have, though, this is something new. Jesus said in Matthew 16, 18, I will build my church. So that being the case, the church is something new, but the church is removed, remember, at the rapture. Correct. So what God does, he says, okay, now that the church is gone, I'm going to go back and I'm going to be working amongst the distinction of my people Israel, the 70th week of Daniel, and the rest of the world, which is Gentiles. So the church is very unique in the history of God's plan of salvation in that it is made up of Jews and Gentiles. But before Abraham, there were no Jews, or actually even before Jacob, there were no Jews. There were just Gentiles. So you've had Gentiles, you had believers that were Gentiles, and then you get to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the 12 tribes. Now you have Israel and the rest of the world. Yeah, distinction. The rest, once the rapture happens, that distinction comes back again, and then during the millennium, it stays. The Gentiles, nations, all the nations, Israel, and then the Gentiles. Well,
yeah, when you sent that to me, I was like, what? And this is the thing is I've never really truly done a deep dive on the Messianic kingdom. I mean, it sounds like I'm ignorant about it, but not to this degree. So again, you just get bits and pieces, or you hear a sermon somewhere and you're like, oh yeah, okay, I gotcha.
Yeah.
Never knew that. Is there anything else you want to talk about this chart here, or are we good?
No, I think that what you just said is right, that this is the deep dive. I mean, is this required to go to heaven? No.
It's not?
No, sorry. But if people want to go deep, this is the nature. And you know what's fascinating is that it's in the Bible. It's been there the whole time, but yet people haven't chased it down. And I think to Dr. Fruchtenbaum's credit, he's a Messianic Jewish guy, scholar, done a great service to the church to chase all these things down and to organize them in such a way that's helpful. He has, again, there's couple dozen charts in the book, which I use all the time, in teaching. It's awesome.